Well, hello, my friends tuning in from all over the United States and all around the world. My name is John O'Leary. It is 10 o'clock on the Eastern Seaboard, 9 o'clock in the Rome of the Midwest. That's St. Louis, Missouri. I'm grateful that you've joined us this morning. And as you know, we come together about once a month or so to talk about where we've been, where we are, and what remains possible in our lives going forward. So welcome to the Live Inspired conversation for today. The conversation is going to be around changing or dying. I know that sounds pretty dramatic, but we're going to talk about why that title and what it means for you. But before we get there, can you share with me where you are tuning in from today? And as we are about a day away from Father's Day, let's celebrate the men in our lives. Let's celebrate the dads in our lives. Let's celebrate the father figures in our lives. So don't only tell me where you're tuning in from. Also share with me one characteristic that best represents your father figure, a gentleman who helped raise you as a child, to guide you through some difficulties in your life. So the day before Father's Day, let's celebrate those men. Tell me where you're tuning in from today. I want to hear from you. I want to see your face up there on social media and share one great characteristic or quality about your father or father figure. This is a live recording, meaning you can listen to it afterwards. But if you're tuning in right now, you can also share with your community. So in addition to liking this and commenting, why not share? This is going to be one that you will want your friends, your family, your followers to be tuning into as well today. So tell us where you're tuning in from. Share with us one great characteristic about your dad and share with your community. I'm going to be looking over at a couple of the comments flowing in already. Hello, Dave. We're glad you're tuning in with us today. And hello, Mike from Texas. Tell us about your dad, Mike. Integrity. Awesome. Rana, we knew you'd be here. Good morning from California. And your dad was courageous. John Daly, Macon, Michigan. Awesome, John. Good morning. Hope things are going great in Michigan. Dave, tuning in from Chesterfield, Missouri. Your father was always present. Sean Driscoll, my brother from high school, South Carolina. And your father, Sean, this is not surprising because it's reflected in you. Your daddy was always smiling and always positive. How about we share a couple more? Kim Seal, my friend with Southwest Airlines, brother. Good morning from the Big D. I was there yesterday, Kim. Glad things are going well for you. Timothy Fisher, good morning from Sherwood, Arkansas. Hello, my friends to the south. My dad taught me integrity and the importance of doing the right thing the right way. Australia is tuning in. Ben, we welcome you from down under, mate. What an awesome spot to be tuning in from today. And finally, Deanna Reyes. Good morning here from Taos, New Mexico. My dad is a beautiful listener. If you're still tuning in, awesome. We're celebrating you today. We're celebrating your life. We're celebrating the fathers who helped guide you forward into your life. And we're also going to celebrate the truth that life is not easy, but that does not take away the fact that it is good. The foundation remains firm and better days remain in front of us. So when I think about where I'm tuning in from today, I'm tuning in from St. Louis, Missouri. And when I think about my dad, his name is Denny O'Leary. He is in a hospital room right now recovering from a surgery earlier this week. He's had Parkinson's disease for almost 30 years. He's struggling today. He's been struggling for almost 3 decades. And he is the most joyful man, most joyful leader, most joyful human being I've ever encountered. When I walk into his room in about 30 minutes, I promise you, from my dad's wheelchair bed or little seat to the side of the bed, I will see this big, goofy grin. I promise you, the day before Father's Day, I will witness joy on my father's face. It is the characteristic that he exhibits and has exhibited his entire life. When life was easy for him, but also more recently, his life has become far more difficult to him. So what are we going to talk about today in addition to where we're tuning in from and celebrating our daddies? Great. Well, we're going to be talking about the change that is ever present in our lives. If I was able to turn this camera that is grabbing me right now over to my left, your right, you would see down our Live Inspired hallway, you'd see just past our studio, this massive 8-foot by 8-foot big old sign with the words, you may want to write these down today. You can't always choose the path you walk in life, but you can always choose the manner in which you walk them. Consider writing those down or tweeting those out or sharing with your friends. Write these down, remember these, and then live by them. You can't always choose the path that you walk in life, but you can always choose the manner in which you walk it. That sign was made for me by a group of prisoners. We've had the opportunity, Kim Seal, speaking not only to Southwest Airlines and Apple and Microsoft, and you pick the organizations around the United States, around Australia, around the world. But in addition to speaking at these larger organizations, we frequently do some outreach, whether that's in a hospital, a school building, someone's living room, or frequently in prisons. You can't always choose the path that you walk in life. You can always choose the manner in which you walk it. That sign was made by a group of prisoners that I spoke to several times. And as much as I love the sign they made, what I love even more about it is every one of the guys, and it was all men that day, they all signed it. So I have this beautiful artwork hanging up in my hallway to remind me of that truth and how difficult life sometimes is. But in spite of what we've done or where life is right now, that even better days remain in front of us. Like redemption remains possible in our story. So today, with you tuning in with a cup of coffee in hand, or whatever you might be drinking on this Saturday morning, I'm not here to judge you. I wanted to share with you one of my absolute favorite examples of a redemptive, transformational story from one of the now greatest guys I've ever met. Tomorrow is Father's Day, but I know a friend of mine named Andre Norman who grew up never getting to know his father. He grew up in Massachusetts, never met his daddy, was practically raised by his grandparents. I'm going to show you a little picture of Andre as a young boy. So it's going to flash up on the screen right now. He was a precocious little child, self-described. He was into trouble frequently, loved music a little bit, but started taking the wrong path in life fairly early in life, even before he jumped into his teenage years. He started selling drugs. He started robbery. He started assault. He started making all these horrible mistakes because he was hanging out with the wrong crowd. He had no vision for his life, and he had no leader stepping into his life saying, "That's not the right thing to do, Andre. You are better than that." He had no one around him to guide him forward, and so he ultimately became the least common denominator. He joined a gang, and then eventually the crimes that he committed before turning 18 that would turn him into juvie and then out the following week eventually led to a penitentiary where he was convicted and then sentenced to 18 to 24 years in jail. I'd like to show you the next picture of what he saw. That's the bus he took in. That's the prison where he was held for 18 to 24 years. At age 18 years of age, though, this boy, he's a young man, he's only 18, he's a baby still, realized that he had to even become tougher than he had been outside a penitentiary on the inside. So he took on this structure of acting like he was the toughest guy in the entire place. He was in fights all the time. Andre Norman incited 2 different riots. So this man is the cause of 2 different prison riots. He was such a troublemaker that he was transferred to 9 different state prisons. He attempted murder within prison 2 different times, and eventually he found himself in solitary confinement for 2.5 years. Next picture, please. Found himself in the solitary confinement for 2.5 years. And it is in this solitary confinement where he lost hope. He realized that he was never going to escape. He was going to die in prison, and that there was no reason for him to take the next right step forward in life. And then he had this turning point. You ever have one of those in your lives? Whether it's professional or relational, or as my friend Dave Ramsey says, sometimes you just get sick and tired of being sick and tired. From this dark, drab cell by himself with no light sneaking in, Andre began to have a vision of what could happen in his life. The story he'd been telling himself up to that point is that his life was utterly out of control. He had never had a powerful, positive influence, and none of it was his fault. None of it. He was just acting because that's the way he was made. That's just who he was. And then he started to reimagine what that could look like going forward. He imagined one day getting out of solitary confinement. He imagined one day getting out of prison. He imagined one day learning how to do something wild, read. He imagined one day getting his GED. He imagined one day teaching somewhere at a university you may have heard of, Harvard. This was his vision. This was his vision. And so he did something from time to time you and I need to do as well. He began asking for help. He raised his hand from the solitary confinement and asked to speak to people to help guide him forward on his journey. He spoke to a counselor, and they talked about anger. And they talked about taking the next right step forward. And they talked about how can you learn how to read. And they talked about maybe one day, could you get your GED? They started dreaming about tomorrow. That counselor introduced him to a rabbi. And the rabbi began visiting with Andre Norman frequently. And they would talk about something Andre had never heard of before, called forgiveness. Not only forgiveness of others, forgiveness over the father that he never met, forgiving the mother who he felt had done a terrible job raising him, but also this important concept of self-forgiveness. So the rabbi and Andre Norman began talking about this important concept of forgiveness. And then two ladies entered into his life, and they got a hold of his heart. I'm going to show you a picture of these two ladies. This is a little bit later on in Andre's journey, but you see his arms wrapped around these ladies. Those ladies were two Catholic nuns who began visiting one by one, day after day after day with prisoner Andre Norman. And they would talk about his heart, and they would talk about faith, and they would talk about God, and they would talk about just because things in the past have led you to where you are today doesn't mean that's what it has to look like going forward, Andre. In other words, you can't always choose the path that you've walked in life, but you can always choose the manner in which you walk it. These individuals, whether it was a counselor, the rabbi, the two nuns, began showing Andre that there was a different pathway for his life. 2 decades after Andre Norman came into the penitentiary, 2 decades after he incited a couple riots and was transported 9 different times to 9 different state prisons and attempted murder 2 different times within prison. 2 decades after that journey began, Andre Norman was released from this prison with this conviction to get back into prison. No, not because he committed a crime, because he wanted to remind others who were there, like he had been himself, that the journey could change going forward, that the path they had been on and might be on right now doesn't mean that it has to be the path they travel going forward. Today, and I'd like to show you a fairly recent of the work that Andre Norman is doing right now. He's doing it yesterday when we spoke together. Today, he is speaking to prisoners primarily throughout South Carolina, around Georgia, but also around the United States and even around the world, reminding them that their life still has value, that their past doesn't need to define their future. And he reminds them of something they seldom hear from others, that there's goodness within them, that there's love within them, that God loves them. He does something that seldom happens within prisons. He hugs them, and he shakes their hands, and he looks into their eyes, and he treats them as human beings. He does this within penitentiaries. He also does it within high schools, but there's one other place where he teaches. He eventually got a job where he serves as an adjunct professor at a university you've likely heard of. I brought a picture to show you of Andre Norman in action teaching at Harvard University, man. He's had the opportunity now over the last several years of serving as an adjunct professor at Harvard. Andre Norman's a remarkable man. This is a guy whose story I've not only read about, but a man who I've had the great pleasure of meeting. Last time I saw Andre, we got in a fight. No, not that kind of fight. We fought over who would have the opportunity and the honor of paying for lunch. Next picture. Andre won. Okay. Andre's a lot bigger than I am. He's a lot more aggressive than I am. So he won the fight for the check. He is as loving, as generous, as charismatic, as big-hearted a person as I've ever met. And yet, if you had met him 20 years ago, you would have seen a man in solitary confinement, believing that the best of his days were behind him. Until until his story in his head and in his heart began to change. So today, my friends, as we look at the challenges that some of us face in our lives, I want to, in a moment, guide you through a few steps that you can take to begin embracing where you are and the limitless possibility that remains in your journey going forward. But if you'd like to hear more about the story of Andre Norman, what you may want to consider checking out after today's episode ends is my entire podcast with Andre Norman. It's on episode 95 of the Live Inspired podcast with John O'Leary. So for those of you who are tuning in for the very first time, welcome to the Live Inspired media channel. We also have something here called the Live Inspired podcast. It's awesome. It's released twice a week. And if you go way back in time to episode 95, you'll find a great human being named Andre Norman who will share his story, this redemptive, powerful story of his life going forward. So Jim, Cindy, and Lee Houston, and everybody else who's tuning in, Debbie Wedemeyer, Lee Houston, Jody, and others, we're glad you're here. The question, though, is how do we ourselves make this change in our lives? How do we embrace where we are, where we've been, and what remains possible in our life going forward? So here's what I'd like you to do. Big sip of coffee, grab a pen, and write down 4 fairly simple steps to make sure that we own where we are. We embrace this gift called life, and then we take the next right step going forward. Let me give you 4 ideas today. Number 1, we'll put it up on the screen for you right now, but I'd like you to frame your story. Frame your story. What does that mean? There's an awful lot of conversation around optimism and how in this current marketplace where you and I find ourselves, there seems to be a loss of optimism and even a loss of hopefulness. So I want to talk about framing your story, not only the story of what remains possible in your life going forward, but also looking back on your story and framing the way we review and view and embrace our life that has led up to this day, June 19th. Juneteenth, man. Happy Juneteenth to all of you tuning in around the United States and around the world. The way we frame the story that you and I are currently living in. When I spoke to Andre, he said one of the most important things he ever did in his entire life is he stopped playing victim to his parents, his mother who was not around, and his father that he never met. He started changing the way he viewed his past. And rather than looking at the people who weren't in his life, he started looking for the people who were. He looked at the 3rd grade teacher who never gave up on him. He looked at the jazz teacher in high school who said, you know what, Andre, you're making some poor decisions, but you are a good boy. You are a good boy. He looked at some of the guys within prison who were kind to him. He looked at the rabbi who kept showing up for him. He started to change the way he framed his story. So the very first step that you and I can take, I think on the journey forward right now, is to determine the way we want to frame our story, the way we want to author our book going forward. What a gift it is to recognize the pen is in your hands, not your parents, no longer, not Biden's, not Trump's, not Obama's, not Clinton's, not Bush. The pen is in your hand. How do you want to frame your story? Not only looking back on it, but looking forward. Because remember this, you can't always choose the path that you walk in life, Andre. But you can always choose the manner in which you walk it. Frame that. You own that piece. The second piece, this one was critical for him. It was to define his purpose. So again, today you may want to consider writing these down, but define your purpose. Define your purpose. Viktor Frankl, who survived the Holocaust, whose books I have read and digested, and I hope you have as well, wrote, when you know your why, you can endure anyhow. When you know your why, you can endure anyhow. What is the why? Well, the why is the purpose. What is the purpose? It's the thing that gets you out of bed on a Saturday morning, even if you're tired from being up too late the night before. It's the thing that gets you engaged in the day, even when physically you may not feel up for it. It's a thing that even if it's raining where you are tuning in from today, you see opportunity to be sunshine for someone else through your life. It's the reason why you choose to succeed and make a difference and truly thrive in life. It's your why. It's your call. It's your purpose. So I'm going to share with you my why and then encourage you to define your why, your purpose going forward. Here's mine. This is why I'm got the big old goofy grin on, even though this is water. It's not even coffee. No caffeine yet for O'Leary. My why is this. I choose to thrive because, for me, God demands it. Family deserves it. The world is starved for it. Let's roll. No excuses. That's my purpose. That's mine. Andre had a purpose of getting out of penitentiary, of helping kids not follow his steps, of meeting guys who are already on that path to remind them of the value of their lives, and ultimately of educating those at Harvard that these individuals behind bars still matter. That was his purpose. That was his purpose. It's an audacious goal to have in solitary confinement when you cannot even read. But that was his purpose. So what's yours? What's your purpose? The best way that I've discovered to define it is to ask yourself the question, why do I choose to thrive? Why would I choose to endure this difficulty today? Why? Why would I do this? Why would I endure that? I choose to thrive because. So the second step along the day, yes, one, you got to frame your story. Now you got to define your purpose. And the third, now look at that. They're popping up on the screen. Way to go, ladies and gentlemen, tuning in and the producers. The third is to claim your agency. Claim your agency. The word agency means the ability to exert pressure and affect change. Isn't that cool? It comes from Latin. Exert pressure and impact or affect change. Whoa, that's good. It's the ability to harness the hope that guides you forward and then take the next right step toward it. It is the exact opposite of learned helplessness. Learned helplessness means you sit at home, arms crossed, and you say to yourself, I've always been this way, and there's nothing I can do to make it better. That's learned helplessness. When you claim your agency, it means just because things are this way does not mean that I cannot make it better. So it's tying hope to action. Okay, tying hope to action. So that's the third step along the way, but there's one more. You can't do it by yourself. You can't just claim agency. You can't reframe your story. You can't own your purpose. You can't take the next right step forward all by yourself. So there's one fourth and final critical step. You got to utilize your community. So my friends, this will be our final step along the way. One of my favorite change organizations of all time is AA. I think they've done a phenomenal job grabbing the hearts and the addictions and the recovery and the possibility of innumerable leaders to remind them that their lives matter and that better days are in front of them. Yes, they use the 12-step process. Yes, there's a whole lot of healing. Yes, they turn it over to a source bigger than themselves. Yes, to all of this. But I think one of the most effective things AA does and all organizations that lead change do is they remind the individuals part of it that they are no longer just individuals, that they get to lean and grab the arms of the ladies and gentlemen around them and walk forward, not just with independence or dependence, but interdependence. So we have to lean into our community. And I know of no one who does a better job of these four principles than my personal coach, our community developer right here at the Live Inspired channel. His name is Matt Miller. So I'm going to grab a sip of coffee right now and invite Matt to join us on the screen and talk about, as we get ready to button up today's program, how do we step into this and live it not only today when we're lit up and on fire and inspired, but tomorrow and the following day and each day then progressively going forward. So Coach Matt, welcome back to Live Inspired.
Well, good morning, and good morning to all of our friends. I've been watching all the comments coming in. And as John talks about the 1, 2, and the 3 and the 4, some people would interpret that as, okay, I just need to do 1 and then 2 and then 3 and then 4 and then I'm done, right? And we all know that's kind of a circular process. And if you've been a part of our community for a long time, we remind you a lot about staying in your circle. And so this is a constant, kind of like the recycling icon. And it's a daily process. One of the processes we've been using, and I encourage you to use it with your family, and Heather, even with your boys that are tuning in with you right now, is setting the goal each day. But then at the end of the day, asking yourself, okay, on a scale of 1 to 10, how did I do? And give yourself a rating. And then ask the question, okay, what went well? And what can I do better tomorrow to be better? And you might think, you know what, that's a pretty simple process. There's got to be more to that. But the reality is the most important person that we need to be honest with us is ourselves. And that conversation between you and how I can be better. And like Andre needed a counselor and a rabbi and some nuns. And as John said, the three toughest words that are hardest to say is I need help. And so why are we here this morning on a Saturday morning with you? Is because we know we all need a spotter. We all need a coach. We all need an accountability partner to help walk this daily life. And it's a daily process. Give yourself a rating. How you doing? And then find somebody in your community. And guess what? You're in the Live Inspired community right now. We are here to help you. If you ever have received a text from me, I remind you I'm always here. We are always here, John and I. So as you reflect this morning and you need a little help, send a text. Our number, 314-207-5010. And everyone on this screen, all of our friends that I see tuning in, John Daly and Jen and Rona and all of you that I've been texting, we're here for you. And we will always be here for you. So with that said, I just want to remind you that if there's anything you ever need to walk this daily process, Andre needed it, John needs it, I need it, and we're here to change ourselves so we can start changing this world. So back over to you, Jo.
Well said. Matt and I and our organization and everybody tuning into our channel believe that actually one person can change the world. And we believe that person greeted us when we got out of bed this morning and stared back at us when we looked into the mirror. So we feel profoundly called to be that change and to do so with your help, with your guidance, with your love and support. So we thank you for being part of this channel. Andre Norman on Father's Day, which is tomorrow, never met his dad. And it's so easy in life to repeat the stories that have been given to us. Just like, hey, generational, just keep living into this thing generationally. So what will Andre Norman be doing on Father's Day? Well, let me tell you. And in fact, rather than telling you, let me just show you a picture. Andre Norman will be celebrating Father's Day with his son. Andre Norman is not only a phenomenal teacher at Harvard University, he's not only a phenomenal survivor of what he's been through and what he's been part of. He's not only a phenomenal guide for kids who are going down the wrong path, but he's also phenomenal, one of the greatest dads I've ever met. Just because we have not received something does not mean we cannot become part of that for those around us in our lives. So I want to thank Andre for being an awesome teacher to me. I want to thank the community here for being an awesome guide for me. You guys encourage us in ways you probably will not know this side of eternity. So thank you for that. And Lee Houston, brother, do not think that I did not see your question pop up on the screen a moment ago. Lee wanted to ask the question, so is this a positivity thing? Is that what this thing really is? Well, Lee, let's talk about that, man. We're going to be talking about that next month. So next screen, team, let's put the next screen up on the board. Yeah, it kind of is a positivity thing, but it's not a brash positivity thing. It's pragmatic optimism. It's the reason why you and I, Lee and Marilyn and Jan and Brian Peters and Ronna Swanson and Diane Redmond and everyone else have a reason for hope and joy in our lives. So yeah, it's a bit of a positivity thing, but it's not about just walking out when it's raining and acting as if it's sunny. It's about recognizing in the midst of the storm that better days are in front of us. And the way we choose to show up in the midst of the storm will influence the way we step into the sun that's around the corner. So it's a yes and. It's a yes and. It's part positivity, but not feigned positivity. There's a true pragmatic reason for optimism, for positivity, and for joy. We'll be celebrating that next month. I look forward to all of you being back for us that time. My friends, I want to thank you for being part of our Live Inspired community and for living into the truth that the way we change the world is one life at a time, starting with the reflection in the mirror. And if you're looking for a quote to hang your hat on today, or you're looking for a quote to maybe have tattooed on your right bicep at the tattoo parlor later on this afternoon, I'll meet you there. The quote is this. Let this take you into your Saturday morning. You can't always choose the path that you walk in life, but you can always choose the manner in which you walk it. There's a great example in a man named Andre Norman who reminds us of that truth. And perhaps the only one who models it better than that is the man that I'm about 8 minutes away from hugging. It is my dad. 30 years of Parkinson's disease, a lifetime of struggles, the inability to speak today, soreness and agony after a surgery, and joy, and joy. So in the midst of the storm, I remind you of the reason for joy in all of our lives. So my friends, for this time and until next time, my name is John O'Leary. Happy Father's Day, and to all of you great leaders out there and to those who have guided you forward into your life. And remember this, the best days are yet to come. The foundation is firm. I look forward to seeing you in a month. God bless you guys. Have a great weekend.